Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to take a look at the European Middle Ages. So, following the fall of Rome, we obviously have some things going on, which we're going to spend some time and talk about that. So, some of the main ideas we're going to run into in this unit are going to be some empire building, or rebuilding, I guess we should say. So, in Western Europe, the Roman Empire had broken into many smaller kingdoms. And during the Middle Ages, we have some great names such as Charlemagne and Otto the Great, who tried to actually revive the idea of this vast empire, such as the Roman Empire was. Both allied with the Church, Christianity, very heavily, which we'll talk about. We move into power and authority. We have some weak rulers, basically at the beginning. We have the decline of central authority. Eventually, this is going to lead to something known as the feudal system, which we'll talk about and dive a little bit more into, in which we have local lords with large estates that assumed power. And eventually, this is going to lead to struggles over power with the church. And the church is kind of this growing power at this time. And then we have, obviously, religious and ethical systems. So during the Middle Ages, the church was unifying, and it was coming together as this large, powerful force. And it shaped people's beliefs and guided their daily lives. And most Europeans at the time shared this common bond of faith through Christianity. So we do have some terms of the unit that we'll have to become a little bit more familiar with. So you can pause here and take a look at those. We also have some figures in the unit. Again, we're going to take a look at some of these guys a little bit closer. And this is where we kind of leave off. So shortly following the fall of the Roman Empire, so if you remember in 476 AD, we have the Roman Empire officially collapsing, at least the Western Roman Empire, right? The Eastern Roman Empire is still a thing, and we see that here on the map, right? Constantinople being the home of the Eastern Roman Empire, the capital. So the Eastern Roman Empire is still going to exist for another 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So the Western Roman Empire falls apart. Romulus Augustulus, the last of the Roman emperors, is ousted from his capital, and German invaders take over the Roman Empire. And basically, at that point in time, it collapses and falls into multiple tribal areas. And so we have this kind of growth of these tribal areas, of these Germanic tribes that start to spread throughout Western Europe. And we're going to take a look at some of these. So as we move through the Middle Ages timeline, we have Clovis, who we're going to talk about, Charles Martel, Pope Leo III, and who crowns the Emperor Charlemagne, which we'll talk about that. The Treaty of Verdun, which follows Charlemagne's empire. We'll talk about feudalism. We'll talk about Otto the Great and how the Holy Roman Empire starts to weaken. And there's going to be some additional points too that we'll add in as we go. So into part one, we have Europe post-Rome, or post-Roman Empire. So again, following the collapse of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, again, we have the Western Roman Empire throughout Europe collapses into smaller kingdoms, I guess we can call them, to where we have these Germanic tribes kind of taken over certain areas and breaking up that power. So what should we call this time period? That's one of the biggest things that actually comes up when we're looking at this time period following the fall of Rome in 476 AD. So from the fall of Rome all the way up to the time of the Renaissance, which kicks off in the 14th century, or near the end of the 14th century, we have come up with a few different names. So we have the Middle Ages, we have the medieval period, and the Dark Ages. Now, obviously, you guys have looked into the Dark Ages a little bit at this point and have recognized that the Dark Ages are kind of this earlier representation of this time period. So earlier historians, from 200 or 300 years ago, would call this time, this gap, the Dark Ages, mostly because it wasn't as enlightening as or artistic or scientific than the years that would follow during the Renaissance. So let's move into talking about the Dark Ages. All right. So typically the Dark Ages do fall generally a lot more earlier on during this time period. So from about 500 to 8 or 900, or maybe even up to 1000 AD. Which, I don't really care for the term the Dark Ages because really it wasn't. There was a lot of things going on. And the Dark Ages just makes you think that it was just a terrible time to live, which, it was. There was a lot of problems and disease and other things which we'll take a look at. But on the other side, there were some benefits to living during this time. So again, we talked about the German invaders, which came down and sacked the city of Rome and ousted Romulus Augustulus and ended the Western Roman Empire. And with this, right, we have the disruption of trade throughout the Roman Empire from both land and sea. All right, so the Europe's economic centers at this point in time just basically fell apart. The cities are abandoned for the most part, and populations flee to the countryside to try and get away from all of these problems. So Germanic invaders could not read or write, which basically left only the church the officials, the monks and the priests, the only ones that were able to read and write, which actually benefited Christianity in the long run. And we'll take a look at that. There was a common language before, right, of Latin in the Roman Empire. And at this point in time, those tribal languages, which as the tribes took over throughout Europe, those tribal languages would continue to expand, and Latin would be kind of drowned out and would slowly begin to disappear. By the 800s, we have a lot of more of the common languages of today, right? English, French, Spanish, Italian. They had basically all evolved from these tribal languages in Western Europe. This forced even more of the breakup that was of the once unified Roman Empire, right? So it's continuing even to make it more difficult for the Roman Empire to come back together. So these Germanic kingdoms began to replace the Roman provinces. We have the church as an institution, which actually survives the fall of the Roman Empire. So Christianity continues on spreading. And during this time, Christianity becomes much more important. The church provided order and security for a lot of people, and even for a lot of officials who were in power. In German society, or this Germanic society, we have a lot of family ties and personal loyalty. So we start to get into people that were protecting their lords, right? The people that were watching over them and kind of taking care of them. So every Germanic chief led a band of warriors who had pledged their loyalty to him. He gave them food, weapons, and treasure, and they felt no obligation to obey another king because they had a great life. And this guy was protecting them. So this made it impossible to establish an orderly government because you had all of these different Germanic chiefs claiming that they were the ones in charge. And they had all of these peasants and noblemen and people beneath them that would support them because, they're giving them all this good stuff. In comes Clovis. So let's talk about Clovis a little bit. So one of the Germanic tribes was known as the Franks. And this was in the Roman province of Gaul, and which is now mainly France and Switzerland, modern-day France and Switzerland. So we have this Germanic people called the Franks who held power in this area, and their leader was Clovis. So in 496, he led his warriors against another Germanic army, and during the battle, he prayed to the Christian God. And we had kind of seen this before when we were looking at Emperor Constantine in the Roman Empire. So during this battle, he prayed to the Christian God, and he was victorious. So he went ahead and decided that him and his men could be baptized and become Christians. He heavily supported Christianity from this point on. By 511, he had united the Franks into one kingdom. So all of these different tribes in Frankish territory were kind of all combined into one. And the alliance between the Frankish kingdom and the church marked the start of the partnership between the two powerful forces. So by 600 AD, with the help of the Franks, the church had converted many of the Germanic tribes and the Germanic people of those areas and surrounding areas. So, with the help of the Roman Empire, obviously Christianity had grown and spread. We have Clovis, who comes into power and continues to help spread Christianity throughout Western Europe. And because of that, now we have a lot more structure in the church. So the church began to build religious communities called monasteries. And here we had these Christian men called monks who gave up actual private possessions and devoted their lives to serving God. We also had women as well who also followed suit, giving up everything and living at what are known as convents, and completely devoting their life to Christianity. So these monasteries also became Europe's best educated communities. So monks opened schools, they maintained libraries, they copied books. So keep in mind, at this time, Germanic tribes did not have the skills to read and to write. So it was really down to the monks and priests and basically all of these higher up Christian officials to basically take on that task. And eventually this is going to alter certain things for the future. So our papal power expands under Gregory the First. So in 590, we have Gregory the First, who becomes Pope, and he broadened the authority of the papacy, or this is the Pope's office. So he expanded it beyond the spiritual role and started looking more towards politics. So rather than just being the leader of Christianity, he starts to turn it into kind of its own empire or its own kingdom. He used the church revenues to raise armies. He repaired roads. He helped the poor. He negotiated peace treaties with invaders. He made the Pope's palace the center for the new Roman government. So the church is becoming a massive power at this point in time. And we can see here how the Franks have extended all throughout modern day France and into modern day Germany and Switzerland. And now we also have Pope Gregory kind of in this Lombard kingdom here, right, who is spreading his power using using Christianity as Pope. And then under Clovis, right, we have this kind of this connection between the two. Moving on a little bit more, we run into a gentleman named Charles Martel. So by 719 AD, we have a new Frankish leader had risen to power. His name is Charles Martel, also known as Charles the Hammer. He extended the Franks' reign around the kingdom, and he Also defeated Muslim raiders from Spain in 732. So this is another thing that we have to keep in mind, because around this time, not too long before this, a new religion had started to spread in North Africa, and also over in the Middle East, and this is Islam, which we will talk about here shortly. So he defeats the Muslim raiders from Spain in 732 AD, saving the Christian Europeans from becoming part of the Muslim Empire, and his victory made him a Christian hero. So after his death, his son Pepin the Short took leadership and was granted king by the grace of God by the Pope at that point. So this really starts what became known as the Carolingian dynasty, and the dynasty is going to continue on with his son and his grandsons and so on. So following Pepin the Short's death in 768, his two sons would end up taking control of the kingdom, and his second one was named Charles, and this is the guy that we're going to focus on a little bit more. So Pepin the Short's son, Charles, took the throne and became known as Charlemagne, or also known as standing for Charles the Great. So during his reign, he actually built an empire greater than any known since the Roman Empire, since ancient Rome. He conquered new lands, and in the process, unlike the Roman Empire, he actually spreads Christianity because he supports it so much. So he reunited Western Europe for the first time since the Roman Empire, and he became the most powerful king in Western Europe. So in 800 AD, Charlemagne traveled to Rome to save the Pope from an unruly mob, and in gratitude, Pope Leo III actually crowned him Roman Emperor. So it's quite a title, being that the Roman Empire has long been gone. So Charlemagne took power from the nobles. He's gaining power above everyone else. He sent out royal agents to watch his lands. They made sure that his landholders, who are also called counts, govern their counties justly. In addition to sending people out to watch his territory, Charlemagne regularly visited every part of his kingdom. So he would constantly move around and meet the people and talk with his counts, and just to make sure everything's running smoothly. Now, a year before Charlemagne died in 814, he actually crowned his son Louis the Pious as emperor. Now, he turned out to be a very ineffective ruler, and Louis the Pious left his power to his three sons, which turned out to be a problem because Lothair, Charles the Bald, and Louis the German, they all ended up fighting one another for who could have control of the empire. So shortly after, in about 843 AD, they signed a treaty known as the Treaty of Verdun, which actually divided the empire into three kingdoms. And here we see that separation, right? We have the East Frankish kingdom kind of over more towards in the German area, which was taken over by Louis the German. We also have Charles the Bald, who takes over the West Frankish kingdom, which is a good portion of modern-day France. And then we also have this kind of central location here, which was taken over by Lothair, who is basically watching over like the Netherlands and Belgium and Switzerland and northern Italy, those general areas, also parts of France and Germany as well. So at the end of Charlemagne's reign, we have this breakup of the Western Europe, which was put back together by Charlemagne for at least a brief period of time, and eventually would end up back under the separation of different powers. And the people of these areas would swear their oath and their loyalty to specific rulers. Again, those rulers will end up fighting one another, and we start to get into different kingdoms, which we'll get into here in the next part. All right, guys, that's it for this part. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.